It's my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Tom Baker. I've known Tom for many years. We just had a really great time. We went to Japan together a couple of months ago now, and spent a week over there, and it was really kind of cool. I remember the first day we were there, Tom and I and this other lady from France looked at each other and we said, I think we've been here before, because there's something very peaceful about Japan. So you all know Tom. He's a former Catholic priest. He's been a psychotherapist now since the early 1990s, and he's one of my best friends. So I'd invite Tom on up.
The water is way away here.
Yeah, they're making work for it today.
Oh, and it has the vodka right by. Yeah, let me try. I feel like I'm on an airplane. There we go. That's something to relax me. Well, in 1965, the Second Vatican Council and the Catholic Church came to an end. This council changed a number of things in the church. Sometimes it's called Vatican II. Has everybody heard of Vatican II? Okay, it was a big deal in the Catholic Church. It changed the Latin Mass from Latin to Mass in the language of the people attending the Mass. And it got rid of lots of picky rules, like not eating meat on Friday, and ladies having to wear hats or veils to cover their heads. In a pinch, ladies used to put Kleenexes on top of their heads and put a bobby pin on that and hold it in place and look funny. But the first parishioner I met upon being ordained a priest was disgruntled about Vatican II, and he was a gaunt older man with gray whiskers and bright blue eyes. And he was mad because Vatican II had canceled meatless Fridays. All his life he had hated the taste of fish, but had eaten it as a mortal duty so he would go to heaven. "Fish tastes like dirty laundry to me," he said. Now the church had changed the rules, and Catholics were lunching on hamburgers and dining on sirloin steaks in the evening on Friday nights with no danger to their immortal souls. "It isn't fair, Father. I sacrificed for years for nothing." And before I could reply, he stomped away. Well, the one thing that Vatican II did not do away with was sin. The church over the years became obsessed with sin. The one thing we all had in common, non-Catholics included, was that we were all sinners. Sin was the one thing you could not escape from for good. You could be without sin for a period of time, which was called being in a state of grace. But sin was so prevalent that you were bound to fall back into it pretty quickly. There was original sin forgiven by baptism. And after that, there were venial sins. They sent you to purgatory, and mortal sins, violations of the Ten Commandments, which sent you to hell. Yes, one person out there is covering their face, remembering those days of mortal sin. Now, the sacrament of reconciliation, or confession, as everybody called it, forgave both venial and mortal sins and placed the sinner in a state of grace until your neighbor's wife walked in wearing a miniskirt and you coveted her, and wham, bam, you were back in a state of mortal sin again. It was ridiculous. Everywhere you turned, you were walking into sin. There was also the occasion of sin, which was an environment that led you into sin, like R-rated movies and a lot of TV. So you had to be careful where you went, what you looked at, and even what you thought. Sin was everywhere. Now, the church taught children they were sinful too, and put them through confession as early as 7 years old, which was considered to be the age of reason. You went to confess, Angela. You went to confession at 6. Okay, that was even before the age of reason. Hearing children's confessions was like being stoned to death with popcorn. The teacher would put up a list of sins on the board, and the children were told to memorize them. And after they knew them by heart, the teacher took the kids to their first confession. Each child repeated their memorized sins to the priest, and often the child forgot their sins and would collapse in tears, afraid that forgetting their sins might be the biggest sin of all. It was kind of it was kind of an innocent mess. Crying children, worried teachers, and the bored priest, which was me. Now, hearing adult confessions was a different story. With adult confessions, human nature was on display. When adults came to confession, it was interesting. I was no longer bored. The two most confessed sins were, 1, the sin of impatience. Everybody is pretty impatient. And 2, and this was in the Catholic Church, the sin of not performing their conjugal duty. This was mostly women, and that meant not having sex when their husbands wanted it. That was a sin in the Catholic Church. It was a venial sin, but it was irritating. Remember that this was a very traditional Catholic parish, so few people used birth control, which was also a sin, and having too many children made everybody impatient. It was a vicious circle. Everybody was way too frustrated for their own good. Now, from my perspective, the whole sin thing was way overblown. The sins that people committed were usually not premeditated. They were like accidents. Parents didn't mean to yell at their children, it just slipped out. Women didn't mean to frustrate their husbands. They were just too tense and tired to feel sexy. Nobody was bad. They were more clumsy than anything else. This attitude of mine started changing the way I heard confessions. It wasn't a big change, but was a little turned towards the positive. I would ask people, after they confessed their sins, to talk a little about the love and kindness they had shown others and themselves. Well, people went on to the point that the pastor told me I was taking too long in the confessional. Too bad, I said, I'll start earlier. I'm getting better results with a balanced approach. And I did. My line got longer and people were happier. It turned out that they had had no occasion in their lives to tell anybody about the love and the kindness that was so much a part of their lives. Now that was then and this is now. Recently, a woman in my Course in Miracles group at the ARE told the group about her granddaughter who was 4 years old. Her granddaughter said to her one time, "Grandma, you never say I'm bad. You just say that I make mistakes and mistakes can be fixed." "That's what I do," the woman replied to her granddaughter. "Well, Grandma," the little girl continued, "I don't just make mistakes. Sometimes I make bad choices. I think I could make better choices, don't you think?" "Yes," the grandmother said, "but you make a lot of good choices." The little girl said, "You're right, I do." Now, at 4 years old, that little girl pretty much understands the essence of ethics. It's mostly about mistakes and choices. It's not about sin, original or otherwise. It's about mistakes, which can be fixed, and about choices, which can be made again. We adults might understand that about each other. Most of the time, people don't mean to hurt. They're mistaken is all, and so much depends on the choices we make and the willingness to choose again, especially when we have made a mistake. Now, what is actually remembered by God, I think, is the good we do, the kindness we show, and the love we give. That's what he writes down. That's what's in the book. When we meet our guides after each life, that's what they emphasize. So now we can be our own guides, bringing up the love we give, the kindness we show, and the good we do. Be that guide for yourself, and be that guide for other people. Thank you.